Good morning. Welcome, everyone. I am not going to take any time more than to say how excited I am that we have our two presenters to present on this topic, and I would just like to welcome Sarah and Juliana, who will introduce themselves and speak about raising resilient children, a topic, of course, that's dear to my heart, dear to many people's hearts, and critical to everything we do. So please join me in welcoming them. Thank you very much for being here.
I live here in New Jersey, actually. I'm a psychotherapist and dance movement therapist. My training has been a lot with children and families. I was an individual and family therapist for a number of years in different schools. Now my focus is perinatal mood disorders and women's wellness. And I'm currently staying home with my kids, so I'm not in practice, but I'm doing a lot of...
You're in full-time practice.
I'm in full-time practice raising resilient kids, which is why.
Practice. It
Yes.
really is practice.
Correct. So my focus right now is my family and also doing things like this, keeping my focus sharp and talking to other people.
Great, and I am Juliana Schneider. I live in Cambridge in Boston area. I have been an educator for over 15 years. I have worked in both urban and suburban communities. I'm a literacy specialist and have done a lot of my work around digital literacy and technology. Most recently, I have been working as an assistant principal in a community act in Boxborough, just outside of Boston. And interestingly, in this role, though I have to say I started on my professional track most interested in curriculum and instruction. Welcome. I think in my most recent role, I have been faced with many health and wellness challenges, specifically as an assistant principal, working closely with psychologists and counselors and dealing with the many struggles children come to school with. I'm at an elementary school, and last year within our school district, we faced 3 student suicides. So that has really informed a lot of our current work around, in fact, our school district this year, the theme is resiliency. We're building those skills with families and with children. And so when I saw that this conference, the focus was around resiliency, those pieces came together. And though I don't come at it from a medical perspective, I think what we're doing in schools really is the overflow of what a lot of the caretakers are doing outside of schools. So it came together really nicely. Did you want to add to that?
Well, the reason we're here together doing this is that we grew up together. We're lifelong friends. We were in the same parish. And I think we credit our friendship a lot to resiliency, and we'll talk about that as well in our presentation, the importance of having relationships.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we just want to emphasize in terms of our presentation is how important it is to have a conversation, and we really set this up in an interactive way. So we encourage you to jump in, to ask questions, and there will be moments where we stop and think together and reflect together. We've provided for you sort of a think sheet. It kind of matches our presentation, but just feel free to take notes and write some of your thoughts about that.
So we're going to just take a moment to look at this question. We're going to be looking at resiliency in kids from spiritual, psychological, and educational perspectives. And all of you are coming to us with your own backgrounds and perspectives. And we're really looking to start the dialogue as well as what we're going to present, but to be able to have some conversation and to start you in further developing your own thoughts on what is it to raise a resilient child, what is resiliency in the life of a child, and why does it matter. So in looking at what is a resilient child, just take a moment for your own self to write down what you see that as being. We've been talking about this for the last couple of days, so with your own working definition of resilience.
I think part of that is what are you most worried about for your children, because resiliency is also related to adversity. So I think throughout the presentation we'll come back to what that resilient child looks like and what are some of the challenges that our children are up against in today's world.
We're going to start by sharing with you the goals that we have for the presentation, kind of hold ourselves accountable and to give you an overview of what we're going to be talking about.
So first of all, we want to define resiliency for our purposes in terms of children, to name the challenges children and families are up against in the world.
And we want to specifically identify what are the aspects of the Orthodox faith that help to build this resiliency. I think this conference we were discussing this morning at breakfast is such a unique opportunity for so many of us who are in professions that are very not focused on God and do not bring that into the conversation a lot. And so it's very nice to be able to support that in our own conversations, as well as to look at what is the best practice. What are the things that we can be doing in our schools, in our homes, in our churches to help to develop resiliency in our kids. So this is our second question for you to think about a little bit. We talked about a child, and this is even to think about in our own selves as people. What makes a resilient person? Is it the same? Is it different? What are some of the qualities, some of the tools that a resilient person has?
And this is where we elicit that from all of you.
Yes.
So what are some of the things that you're thinking about in terms of what makes someone resilient?
Being able to roll with the punches. I think a strong family support system.
Maybe one of the most important things in terms of that connectivity piece and being known.
I was going to say perspective
Okay, doesn't
and recognizing things for what they are and not what you're having them to do.
Absolutely.
I think even like even if it's not with like your immediate family, finding those people that can model those relationships, whether that be in your church or whatever, but finding that.
I think what you say too is very connected in our work in schools, because so many children in public schools come to school without those communities and without the family structures that support the values that many of us were gathered together because we share those values. And so that makes the work so much more complicated because we're filling in these gaps for people. And in addition to that, specifically in my work as a public school educator, my religion and my faith and my spirituality is who I am, and how do I navigate a world that in some instances can almost feel hostile towards Christianity. So I think that that's very true in our work as caretakers, absolutely.
I think you bring up an important thing, seeking out resources. What are the resources to fill in those gaps?
Anything else that people jotted down?
Actually, it goes along with the resources, the flexibility, and the coping skills. How flexible is the person versus how rigid, depending on how many resources makes a person more flexible because has tried and has failed, but in a safe place, which has given him muscles, to tolerate situations that are very hard, that would lead to suicide or
Absolutely.
depression and so on and so forth.
The flexibility is huge, and being flexible thinkers and flexible problem solvers, and back to what you said in terms of being able to take perspective in situations. That's, I believe, one of the really important skills that children need in order to avoid those situations. Yes.
Also having like ears to what other people are saying, so be able to take what you might be saying, the support that people are giving you, and take that and use that to your advantage.
I think that it's strange to say, but I think what makes a person resilient is struggle. You can't be resilient if you don't go through adversity. But going through it alone equals trauma. So adversity and intimacy, like adversity and someone close, seems to be a real kind of way that, and then they learn coping skills, and almost the greater adversity, the greater the resiliency.
Absolutely.
If there's that intimacy, if there's that, mentor or whatever.
I think we would agree with all of the statements.
One of the things I work closely with a child psychologist as a consultant in the school, and to what you're saying, one of the terms that he has are snowplow parents, and this sort of feeling as parents or as caretakers that we want to remove
Right.
all of the struggle
Right.
for children in
Right.
front of us, and how when we're doing that, we aren't giving them the opportunity to develop the skills. We aren't giving them the experience. And I think back to what you said also, developing the flexibility, but also in that being able to take risks. And I think that also speaks to the adversity, because we're always going to be able to we'll always be faced with adversity. We have to be able to know how to manage that and when to take risks, and what risks are safe,
Right, right.
and all of that in terms of the boundary piece. So there are many parts to what many qualities and skills that we need to nurture in children in terms of making them have the skills to be able to deal with life's challenges.
We found this upcoming quote encapsulates a lot of things that we're going to touch upon, and also that you touched upon. At the heart of resilience is a belief in oneself, yet also a belief in something larger than oneself. Resilient people do not let adversity define them. They find resilience by moving towards a goal beyond themselves, transcending pain and grief by perceiving bad times as a temporary state of affairs. People do seem to differ in their inborn ability to handle life's stresses, but resilience can also be cultivated. It's possible to strengthen your inner self and your belief in yourself, to define yourself as capable and competent. And I think this holds a bunch of things, both that we will encounter adversity, and how is it that we do that? Do we roll with the punches, or do we become trapped by them? And I think it's also the fact that you have a concept of something larger than yourself, that you're not alone. And of course, in our perspective, we see that as having God with us. But for some people, that can be other things, having community, having resources. And also that it's temporary. It's not going to last forever. And we have our eyes to something greater beyond this life that we have, but that anything is finite, and it's not a permanent state. Yes?
I was just kind of stimulated by the words capable and competent, because we were talking yesterday about how resilience is a lot like a piece of metal being bended in adversity.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's kind of a paradox in that we want to be bent and stretched in order to grow, but we don't want to be bent and stretched in the sense that all of life's struggles are, tossing us around and making us unstable, so that we're bending to every little influence that comes towards us. So that I think competency kind of gives people, I think it's important, just because it makes people believe that they don't have to bend to every little influence that comes their way, that they're able to navigate different voices in their lives and different struggles without having to take it all so seriously.
I'd agree, and I think there's a continuum that this goes upon, right? There's adversity, there's the struggle, there's the learning from it, and then hopefully there's a point at which you're able to function in life, that you've risen to the challenge. And this is something that we're going to talk about, that it's not, as Father Bear put, an infant doesn't come out a totally compassionate and loving being, right? We have this learning, and we don't, we're not born with everything that we're going to be. We have the ability to cultivate and to change, and that's something that we're going to focus on.
Which actually, adding to that too, when we think about raising our children with the structures of the church and this internal spiritual life, from that comes discernment, which is incredibly important in navigating the influences of the world and the pressures around children specifically for our purposes. So this is a visual that we've used in the schools just in terms of thinking about, the bouncing back, all of the resourcefulness, the problem-solving skills, and it's just another, I love visuals. I think it can help us sometimes wrap our brains around what it is that we are teaching children in order to be specific about that. So this is one way to think about becoming resilient. One of the things in terms of, for our purposes, in this presentation that we believe is incredibly important, and that I believe is incredibly important as an educator, is how we have to be incredibly specific with children about what it is we expect of them and what qualities that we value as a family. And it really has to become part of the vocabulary of a family. We can't have these sort of abstracts that exist. You know, we go to liturgy on Sundays, we're Orthodox Christians, we believe this and we believe that, but it actually has to come down to a very explicit level. When we teach things in mathematics or in literacy or whatever it is, we state the goal of the lesson, and based on that goal, we assess children, we come back to the goal, they self-assess, they reflect in terms of where they are as a learner and whether they've mastered that. And I would say too, when we're raising our children, we need to choose the values that we're going to focus on. And I always say 3 to 5 things that really sort of become the umbrella for other things. So in one value, other things exist, obviously, kindness or love. There's many parts to that, but children have to be able to name what it is that their family believes in. And I think as parents and as caretakers, we have to constantly have that dialogue so that vocabulary becomes the family language. I'm going to talk a little bit about Carol Dweck. A lot of her research has informed a lot of what actually we're doing right now in schools around resiliency, but her work around the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. So this idea that if you have a fixed mindset about something, you're born with a certain amount of intelligence in a specific area. How many times do people go into an environment and someone says, I'm just not a math person?
I'm not a dancer, I can't move, you know, all sorts of things that people come up with that they have decided that they're not capable in this area.
So I think that really what we believe is that, and I believe that the Orthodox Church actually supports under all of this, is how important it is to know that, in fact, things aren't fixed. We're on a continuum with absolutely everything, whether it is how we perceive ourselves and our own abilities, so I'm not a math person, whether it's how we perceive our behaviors. I mean, how many times I've heard in church, I can't stand in church for that long, I can't do this, you know, and how do we as adults understand, well, this is actually part of a growth mindset, we have to build stamina, and we have to break things down in order for kids to be successful. You don't go onto a soccer field and win a game, there's lots of practice behind that. But also, and back to the perspective taking, in terms of how we perceive our world or how we perceive other people. So understanding that someone's not just mean or bad or things like that, but it comes from a place and it belongs on a continuum. So Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset versus fixed mindset really is, I believe, a wonderful frame to think about a lot of these things that support resilient children. Included a couple of graphs that I thought were helpful to see, but this is students who were taught malleable intelligence had a clear increase in math grades. So when we teach children to think about certain disciplines in a way that they can grow in that, and we frame that for them, their performance will increase. Whereas when they believe that they're just not good at something, it will decrease. This one I almost find more interesting and pertains to certainly my life and all of our lives in terms of raising children. But students who are praised for effort outperform students who are told they were smart. And it's fascinating because we are so fixed, you know, you're so wonderful at the piano, or you're so great at this, and you know, we blame our parents for lots of things, but anyway, I blame my dad for destroying me in this way because he was so proud of his children, you know, and always telling us how wonderful we are, and it's only gotten worse with his grandchildren. I'm like, you have to stop praising them for being good at things. Instead, it's their effort, and it's what they put into things, and it's how they've grown in something. And I feel like it's absolutely everything, because that's where we may not be explicit about things, but we're developing how children believe about themselves, what they believe about themselves and their abilities.
I'd say it's the difference between, you know, in this math test saying, oh, you're so smart, you did well in math, or oh, you worked so hard, you studied so well, you did well in math. And I think it's praising that the effort and the work that we do in whatever category it is to the accomplishments versus just this inborn ability you either have it or you don't.
Adding to that too, I believe it's deeply connected to a person's ability to take risks, because if we're looking for affirmation for you being perfect at something or wonderful at something, we don't want to take the risk and potentially be perceived as not good at something. I know I struggle with that certainly in my own life.
Question?
Yes.
Well, the slide before when it said the student that was more malleable increased in its math grades,
Mm-hmm.
that goes with Father Bear about letting us,
Yes.
relax in the hands of God.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So just to share some of the work in terms of what is happening within schools, this is just a poster I photographed quickly of some of the work teachers are doing with children around reframing, there's providing sentence stems and reframing their words in such a way that they're internalizing the fact that I have control over this. And it's not just in an academic sense, it's in a behavioral sense as well. And it's in terms of who they are as people and decisions that they make. Well, no, I'm not just this way because I'm this way. I have control over this and I can change. Which, amazingly, I feel like goes back to our entire framework around repentance and around confession and around these structures that are given to us by the church in order to do exactly this work that has now been moved to this psychological perspective, which ultimately is just affirming what we know as believing people.
I think if we look at it from the psychological perspective, we say, changing behavioral patterns and laying down neural pathways and all of these things, our brain is malleable. We can change behaviors and things that we feel stuck in patterns for, and it's really important to be able to share with kids, this is not just how you are or who you are, your body, you get better at sports, your brain, your heart, these things are things that we can exercise and shift.
In exercising and shifting it, it obviously takes time, it takes effort, it takes coaching and guidance. I think one of the challenges Father Bear brought up was this idea that our inability to see death. And in that, I think also connected to that is this desire for instant gratification, and everything is about now and how I feel. And in order for us to build resiliency, which ultimately comes back to the struggle and the adversity, these things take time, and they take multiple tries, and they take providing an environment for children where they can make themselves vulnerable, where they can take risks, where they can explore where they're at in relationship to what that adversity is, and then how do they take what they learned from one situation and apply it to the next. And that also connects to the, sort of the connectivity about the family and, in some instances, the school, to help children make those connections, because they're not always going to see that in fact, they're not going to see that for themselves. So that connected person pointing this out is really important. One last thing about this, I think about this too in terms of my adult relationships. And sometimes we want to look at a person, right, and they're struggling with whatever it is. And maybe we've struggled with that thing or something similar, and we want to put onto them, well, it's just this, and you want to give them advice, and this is what you need to do, and this is where you need to be. But we're all at a different place. And I think as educators and therapists and medical professionals, we have to be really mindful of where that person is on that continuum. And when we think about it in terms of the educational perspectives, the zone of proximal development, and if you imagine a bullseye, you think about what is really easy for this person and what is so difficult for this person, and how do I meet them where they're at in terms of finding a place where they can grow with guidance somewhere between those two spaces. Yes.
You make me think of something as you're talking. I'm thinking, which means disappointments is an area where the child or the adult or the person needs to develop a relationship. That disappointment is not catastrophe. Disappointment, how to take the disappointment and incorporate it in the person's way of looking at things, rather than saying, pushing it away. I have to know the risk, I have to know the answers, especially with children. And to try to stay away, which is the Greek amartia, or I don't like it the way we say it in English, because sin does not mean missing the mark.
Doesn't
Right,
translate,
right.
yeah.
So disappointment is much easier with missing the mark. I'll try again in a different way. Amartia, it would seem sort of confuses me.
Well, I think, talking about that and looking at it, even as you were saying, you start with something that's easy and then you kind of narrow into the bullseye. And I think this happens in our pastoral counseling with our priests, in our confessions and things. The priest kind of, different people are on a different continuum of where they are with their fasting or whatever it is, that they're coming into a place that things get increasingly more difficult, and that when they miss the mark, there's a place for that.
Right.
There's a way to come back from that. We have
Right.
this ability for our repentance and remission of our sins or whatever it is, that there is a structure provided to make it so that if we do something wrong, it's not the end. It's not the end of our journey. So I think that's an important thing that the church gives us
Right.
as well.
I think in terms of the disappointment, and that almost comes back to what I was saying with being the snowplow parent, which is a great metaphor for what we need to do as raising children, or not to do, exactly.
Anyway.
Our job is not to protect children from disappointment, and as painful as it is to us as their parents, that's not what our work is. In fact, our work is to guide and love them, but to give them the space to feel disappointed.
Right.
And to sit with that feeling and to learn from it and grow from it in order to go into the next disappointment and, bounce back from it in a different way.
So we're going to take a moment to reflect for yourselves on where in your lives and aspects of your personality and self do you feel you have a growth mindset, or do you feel you have a fixed mindset in your own understanding? And this is personal for you. You don't have to make
stand
me
up
share anything and
Put it into the ancient faith
You're
recording.
first.
State your name clearly, please.
So, your private notes, we will collect them.
Just a clarifying question.
Yes.
We have aspects of growth and fixed mindsets in every part of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Could you drill us down a little more?
So I think one of our processes of thinking is that where we are at in relationship to our mindsets informs how we are modeling and how we are nurturing our children. And so, for example, if I'm a person who has a
Temper. I'm a
Hypothetically.
person with a
Leave it
temper.
random and hypothetical.
Let's say I'm a yeller. And I'm just a yeller, and I'm going to yell, and that's how I'm going to interact with my kids. And that's a very fixed mindset.
Thank you.
perfect, as recited first.
If I could say, as I look at what I write, it seems like the areas I'm not good at, I have a fixed mindset with. And let's say it's a temper, or if that's what I struggle with, I'm more tending to have a fixed mindset with that than the things I'm good at. I'm always learning, growth, opportunity, challenge is good. But with my own, passions or sin, or struggles, that kind of the fixed mindset seems to be attached to that.
Interesting observation.
That is interesting.
Mhm.
Thank you.
So we're going to shift a little bit and think about what are these adversities? What are these challenges and struggles that come to the kids? What are they facing today? What are the things that you see in your homes, in your practices, in your parishes that are confronting the kids with challenge, that are hopefully helping them to become more resilient, but might be big stumbling blocks for the kids and their families?
And if you go back to our first reflection, thinking about what are you most worried about for your children?
So I think I'll use myself as an example. I started off in private schools, Christian-based. I have very strong, faithful households, thankfully. But then I went to public school, and I was certainly faced with like many challenges, things that I wasn't sheltered from, but I wasn't aware of either. And so I got lots of questions, and I had a place where I could bring those problems to the dinner table and discuss it, and then move on and like continue on with my life. So let's say like fasting. Let's say Wednesday and Friday, whatever, you can have meat at lunch and everyone else did, and like, you know, PBJ every day, and you're really tired of it, but like everyone's coming. It's a very simple struggle, you could say, like fasting at school and not strain. So I guess I'm using this example because it's so basic, but those happen like with children and their faith in the public school setting. Little things add up so quickly, and if like you can't take those, and then if you can go home and learn, or if you have people that support you that are like, no, we fast and this is why, and it's so great, it's really hard, it sucks, whatever, but this is why we do it, and it can make you stronger, it can also weaken, whatever. But little struggles like that, they add up, and I think that then when you get to bigger issues, you go off to college, you are on your own. If you have been strengthened in those, and are more resilient, I don't know if that makes sense. But then when you're faced with a lot bigger obstacles, like abstaining from sex, or not going to that party that everyone else is going to, or whatever it is, or going to church on Sunday and just like getting up in the morning to do that, you've been trained with those minor things to face the big things and do well.
I think you're right, and I think we're going to look at a little further down, how do we attend to these challenges, which you gave some really good examples.
Oh yeah,
Sounds like you
pretty
had
basic.
no great, a good basis for being able to do that. But I think what you're really saying is confrontation with the wider culture. How do kids of faith, how do they handle when their faith is in conflict with the majority of the culture around them? I think we can say our country might have started as a Christian-based country, but our broader culture is not in support of that anymore, and so there's a lot of conflict. And if you're not in a homogeneous setting, which most of us aren't, then you're going to be faced with that for sure.
I think you also touch on feeling different, and I think talking to children about the fact that they are different, and being a Christian just inherently is different, and that's actually what my parents always used to say, that's what makes you beautiful, and you don't understand it yet, but and I think it's true. I think that we have to let our kids sit with that feeling, guide them through it, but it's hugely difficult when you're navigating public schools.
Right.
I struggle with it as an
Schools,
adult in
I
public
go to an
schools.
Orthodox college. And
Exactly.
Still struggling. I mean, my siblings and I were like, oh, we have the Doran's curse. Like, we're so different than everyone.
Yeah.
But like, we had confidence in it, and that was really hard. But whatever it is, I shouldn't use that last name. Everyone knows that name.
Yeah.
I was just going to talk. I was just thinking about. Father John was talking about, we're born as infants, and the same thing in our virtue. We're born infantile in our virtues, and we don't yet have these virtues developed. And I think what worries me, there's someone older I know who's not married. She's like in her 60s, and she's like, why would I want to bring a child into this world? So that's kind of her like, she has so much kind of like fear of suffering, but anyway, I think if I were to think about myself having children, what I would fear for them, besides keeping the faith, is also like, there were so many people that I met I went to public school for my whole life before going to college, and I met so many people with so many different kinds of suffering, and so many different home situations, and so many different behavioral issues, and so many different emotional issues, and all those scars and pains that people bring into school, it affects the way they interact with their friends, and then you start to internalize those feelings, or you start. But I think to navigate the pain that people are going through and the significant, and you've seen children with significant trauma, I'm sure, significant struggles from their home life or whatever it is, the ability to be a friend to that person and to navigate their suffering in addition to your own suffering takes a lot of maturity and virtue. And so I feel like kids often have to be a friend that they're not ready to be yet. And I look back even in high school, when I thought, in high school we think we're mature and everything.
Yep.
But there were points in my high school life where I know that I was not capable of actually serving my friends. Because that takes sacrificial love. And if you're not, we can't expect children or teenagers they can't always be prepared to be friends for those people. So I think people often there's kind of like a movement, especially in Orthodoxy, like homeschooling is very popular, which is fine, great. But I think maybe there's sometimes that fear of school is evil and my children are going to be polluted or corrupted in whatever way. But for me, it's almost scary to think about, not that they're going to be corrupted, but that they're just going to be so overwhelmed by the pain and suffering of other people, and they're not going to know how to process that. And they may even start adopting those emotions and those behaviors that they see in their friends because they think it's normalized.
Which is exposure, when you're exposing your children to things that your family wouldn't necessarily choose to. Just as frightening as this is, average age child is exposed to pornography, 11 years old. I've dealt with it in the elementary schools, where children, by a mistake or on purpose, are navigating these places through the internet.
I've read even younger.
I have too.
8 is often the slightest
Yeah.
statistic.
This was in this Gail Dines study. 35% of internet downloads are pornographic. 88% of downloads include violence against women. 64% of children have access to the internet via their own laptop or tablet. This is a huge topic in our school right now because elementary age children are coming to school with phones. Those phones don't have filters. They're using them for things that we would never support in a school environment. And we all know we're addicted to our own phones. I mean, we're modeling that behavior, right? This is the way, and the world has sort of sped up. I think with that, we live in this world that has more opportunity than it ever has, but it has less predictability, and it's incredibly frightening as parents. As we've spoken to, 41% of high school students reported having sexual intercourse, and I think this becomes the norm in schools. 26% of Orthodox Christians attend liturgy weekly, and I do know that we live in this pocket where there are many children who are homeschooled or going to Christian schools, but I would say most aren't. And I would say that most Orthodox Christian children are navigating public schools on a daily basis, and we both did. And it doesn't mean they're, destined for some horrible life, but that makes our work even more.
It makes this even more important.
As a father of very young children, what worries me is the feeling that the world has lost its mind. And this has all happened very suddenly. I think, this generation of parents now is facing something that no other generation of parents has really had to face before, which is the internet revolution, which really, when I was a child, we still had rotary phones, and black and white TVs without remote controls, and now we have
Access is unbelievable now.
And it's not just that public schooling, not public schooling, it's the culture. It's all around. It's everywhere. You can't escape it. There are things that I never had to face as a child that my children will have to face. And I don't understand. I'm not a computer guy. I don't know all the things that they're exposed to. I don't have a Facebook page or any of this other stuff,
Fixed burst growth.
Right. But it's not just that. It's also the sense of anxiety.
It is, absolutely.
It is, and I think that's what we're going to be looking at next, really, is what can we do to help, I guess I'm doing this to
Yeah.
put our arms around our kids in these communities to try and help allow them, because we can't hide the world from them. But what we can do is give them the tools to go into the world and hopefully do good things, you know, to change hearts and minds.
That kind of reminded me of a session that I did with some kids recently. I'm an ambassador for our school, so we go out and we do retreats with Orthodox kids, and I did an arts and craft one, and I told them to draw their favorite thing in nature. We read the Genesis story, I had them like read it, and then I was like, look at all the beautiful things that God gave us, draw your favorite thing in nature, take it back to your mom. And at least 3 kids in each group, there were groups about like 15, so a huge amount of kids, drew like natural disasters. They drew like
Even more than
fires.
that.
It was unreal. Kamal was there with me. They just drew these like horrendous sights, like people like dying, and like
House is burning down.
they're like where's black? I need black. It's like my soul. I had one kid say that every session. We had 4 groups, and these are Orthodox kids. They were all
Carrying
Orthodox.
that weight and that anxiety.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I was like shook. I was absolutely shocked by what these kids were like telling me. And they were young too. They were really young.
I think it speaks to the pain that is out there, and you know, the media. You know, when we brought up Las Vegas, you know, the anxiety is in there for the parents, and that filters down to the children. Absolutely.
On a hopeful note, I think one of the things that we need to be reminded of is that we have been given this great gift, and that is the gift of the church. And the church is a hospital, and it always has been. And, you know, this quote from St. John Chrysostom, which I feel like has been said in other ways with different church fathers, the church is a hospital and not a courtroom for our souls. She does not condemn on behalf of sins, but grants remission of sins. And sometimes when I think about what our work is and again, I'm speaking from a public school administrator, and thinking about all these buzzwords, you know, even what I'm saying in terms of growth mindset and resilience and meditation and mindfulness. I mean, how many times do we hear these things? These are the tools that the church has given to us already. And so how do we draw upon these in order to internalize for ourselves and then educate our children in that
Church
way?
is giving us the strength to teach us and to restore us and to give us the resilience. So we really will now talk about what is the things that our faith gives us. What can we be focusing when we talk about explicitly naming things for our children? We can explicitly name them for ourselves and then for our kids to say, these are the things we're building. This is what we want to develop in you.
So we're going to take a few of these on, but these are some of the things, and this is a superficial list of what the church gives us. One of the things that we believe is mentionable is humility in terms of understanding our world and our place in that world. Throughout the history of the church, we are given the lives of the saints as examples of ultimate humility. I mean, I feel like, you know, St. Mary of Egypt is one of the most well-known saints, but the story that lies in that, both for her and Father Zosima, is something that is an incredible instructional tool. Even my own patron saint, St. Juliana of Lazarimov, I've internalized my own patron saints and how she cared for the poor. And we all have different stories and lives of saints that resonate with us as individuals, and our children need to know that these lives of the saints belong to them, and these are the examples that we are given in the Orthodox faith in order to live. Also, in terms of humility, I would add the hierarchy of the church, and that we must submit ourselves to that hierarchy, whether that is it in terms of, you know, ordination and those sacraments, or whether that is in terms of our work in the church or our role as men and women in relationship to one another. This all builds in ourselves and in our children a sense of humility. Patience. I think patience for me also goes along with boundaries and delayed gratification. I mean, all these things are sort of intertwined, but we think about how many times as children, when's communion? When are we going to take communion? You know, all of those little things that
Favorite part of the service.
absolutely where kids, you know, they are taught literally by just going to the service, nothing more, what it means to be patient, fasts and waiting for Pascha.
The joy that comes with a period of waiting.
And in terms of patience too, and actually being in the service and understanding that, and this is where it, for me, is very connected to boundaries, is that there is a time and a place for everything. How many children, and I see this all the time, I was at the Pops last year, and this family had just, they had, the child in front of me had an iPad, and it was watching an iPad as the symphony orchestra is playing. It was just astounding. But I think when kids are not brought up in a regular environment where there's a time and a place for things, if we put them in school or in other time, they don't have that understanding. They haven't internalized what it means to behave.
I think it goes to, you know, the church imposes periods of denial and hardship to allow us to build this hardiness, you know, to strengthen our souls, to build this patience, to have us understand that we can wait for things that are worth waiting for.
You make me think that if the parents are anchored in exactly what you're describing, then it is not a matter of teaching, but it is a matter of experiencing, because the kids will adapt and adjust to that kind of way of life without making it cognitive, but making it experiential. And you know, all those things are anchoring of the family, which in turn anchors the children. Domino effect type of thing.
We agree, and we will explore that thoroughly.
I mean, it has to be both,
Yeah.
ultimately, and I fully agree with you. They must, I mean, children must go to church and experience it. You're absolutely right. Yes,
I was just gonna say, we teach through everything that we do,
Yeah.
absolutely.
constantly, whether we are doing it intentionally or not. We are
Right.
always teaching through our example. But you're right that it does have to be supported by explanation in some cases, so that what you say and what you do are congruent,
Right.
right?
There's
So there's
clarity.
not a dichotomy that, you know, the whole do as I say, not as I do
Mm-hmm.
attitude, just, it's not effective.
And as human beings, those aren't always congruent, and I
Right.
think that that's where confession comes in, and preparing for confession as a family, and talking with our children about, you know, what's appropriate, but our own journeys in terms of where our thoughts are and where our actions might not be aligned, and how we are rectifying that through repentance.
I think that goes to further, you know, the development of the spiritual self. That you're right, we will model that for our kids by showing that we are fallible, you know, and that we, you know, kids, you know, if they're growing up with you in the church, they see their parents going to confession long before they know what it is, and long before they experience it themselves. They have this, you know, hopefully you're having a dialogue about what is it that you're doing, what's going on, and the faith gives us that to be able to develop our own spiritual hardiness, and gives us prayer. You know, I think it's a tool, an invaluable tool, to teach children how to pray. And, you know, especially you're talking about the things that kids come up with. I mean, my daughter is 7, and she's a very sensitive person, and she has a lot of anxiety, born from many different things. And, you know, one of the things that we teach her both at home and in Sunday school, we do this every week, we teach the Jesus prayer. It's both a tool, you know, to use, and it's spiritual healing. It's, you know, if it's something that they can internalize, it's something that will give them, you know, multiple levels of resilience.
My little niece, who is now in 5th grade, this summer, she also has anxieties around things, and a very precocious child, and internalizes things like death and other things at a level that I think is unique to her. And she read this American Girl book this summer about anxiety, and she's self-diagnosed. She said, she's like, I have anxiety. And she said, I now know why I pray so much. it's because I have anxiety. And it was like this amazing realization that she's been, you know, she has her prayer book, she reads her prayers before she goes to bed when she wakes up, and it's part of the family culture. But it made me almost want to weep, because what a gift that she has in order to regulate that. And so many people and so many children don't have the tools of regulation.
I just want to touch on two more things before we move on. That, you know, decorum, how we comport ourselves, teaching children about what it is to walk into a church, to venerate icons, to be, how they carry themselves, and these aspects of interacting with people in a broader context as well as fellowship. I mean, one of the biggest things we can offer is the community of our church and the fellowship of other people who hopefully are like-minded, and the connections and the relationships that will build and nurture and let them see that they aren't alone in this, or they're not so different. You know, we have this come up a lot in our church. We're very blessed to have a number of children, and that where my kids might feel a little bit different in school, they come to church and they're all together, and they see that they're not the only ones in that way.
I think I so agreed. I think that it's so important that parents model this behavior, and I do think that explanation is so important, and not everyone not all parents have that education and the resources to know, and not all kids have parents that go to church.
Absolutely.
So like grandparents, whatever it is, the consistency is key. And I think it's also important that at a parish level there is consistency, which starts with the priest, I think, and that not only the children are educated through Sunday school and youth group or whatever it is, but that the parents are educated and that they are taught these things that are so important that our youth learn, but the parents need to know too, because I mean, not everyone grows up with grandparents that taught them this, or parents or whatever, and we have so many people coming to the church, which is so beautiful. We love that the word is spreading, but the tradition isn't just it has to be taught. It can't just be modeled. You can't go to church and find out all of these things. When you come to a church, you need to, and you're new, and all of these things add to not only the children's resilience, but the adults as well.
Absolutely, and I think that's where the community, being involved, hopefully all feel, part of raising the children in the community. When children are lucky enough to have that, which unfortunately many aren't.
I have a question. What do you do when that safe space of the church and the community is violated? Because I've seen that happen a lot when something happens within a parish, and the child's sense of community and acceptance and vulnerability to that community is then diminished through something tragic happening.
I think there's a lot that needs to be done, and there's a lot of it's a big topic, but the ownership that needs to be taken by members of that community, and either getting outside resources or help within the community. It depends on what type of violation. If it comes from the top down, that's very difficult. But hopefully there's leadership there to help shepherd the community through that as well.
But I mean, I've seen this within my home parish, where even a small violation, where let's say you have a Sunday school class and all of the girls don't want to go, you know what I mean, and they're kind of hostile towards her, and the church is supposed to be this place in this community where kids go when they feel that hostility at school.
I think that takes adult intervention. I mean, that takes a Sunday school teacher, a priest, someone to help to work with those kids, navigate that. Yeah.
I mean, I think too, even when we're teaching all of these things to our children, we can't be so naive to believe that people are not going to fall. I mean, let's be honest about it. Tragedy falls upon all of us, whether we're Orthodox Christians and our children have been raised with such values or not. And I think what's so profound, though, about raising the children within this environment is that even when people detour, there's something to come back to, and there's a framework that they have when they fall into despair. And even in subtle ways, too. I mean, I look at our friendship, which I think I believe we were given to one another as friends, and we've had our own friendship navigation and life navigation. And it's interesting that as an adult, the people who I am closest to are those who I share faith with. And so we have to believe that, and we have to trust that. The other thing that I just want to say about when a tragedy falls upon a community, I think we have to believe that structures are human in a way, and there is going to be tragedy that happens. I think it's important to, in terms of a distinction of a belief in God and a faith and a spirituality, and I think sometimes that has to be the overarching understanding.
But they're not the same. God and this human area are not always the same, and there will be.
It would take me about
Saying,
20 minutes
yeah.
to develop
If
this
we have
thought,
about
so
4 minutes.
okay.
We're going to move
I
on
get what you're saying.
to our best
I want to come back to that.
which we've touched on at different times, and I think these are things that we might, already know many things. We should be taking our kids to church. We should start them young. We should be modeling for them, but how do we do that? And the number one thing that we believe is helpful, in trying to teach children resilience is working on our own resilience, is working on our own fixed mindsets, on attending services and going through confession and repentance and communion, and having our kids see that, and having those internal structures and things set up within ourselves so that we can be strong to be able to do that for the kids around us, whether they're our own children, the kids in our parish, the kids that we counsel, the kids that we teach, whoever they might be, but that we are strong. And, I think we feel that that's really living the life in the church. I mean, we have a unique opportunity here to be able to say that. In many of our environments, that's not, how you can really express the foundation of who I am and the strength that I bring as a counselor and a parent is that I have this strong faith and belief in God. And that comes from being part of the living church.
So it's interesting because I was going to a spiritual father one time, well, you know exactly what to do. You need to say your prayers and fast. And it's the same message over and over again. And I think the reality is we do know what we need to do. It's making the decisions to do that's so difficult. I think believing that our children can do these things and having high expectations for them and guiding them towards this is so much part of the life journey towards salvation. Making
hard decisions for them at times about parents. We talk a lot about Sunday morning practices. It's just a simple example of, if you've got soccer every Sunday morning, you're not in church. And what is that teaching your children? Some of those decisions where you have to kind of weigh what are our, umbrella family values, and what are the things of the world that are coming in to influence and change that.
I think in terms of a takeaway from today, one of the things that I would be grateful if everybody left here with was one subtle shift in ourselves that we could make in order to change a behavior or change something in ourselves that could manifest itself in our children. And also a couple of key and explicit values or behaviors that we might vocalize to our children and that we might make as part of our vocabulary in our families, and really taking that on and challenging ourselves to go back and implement that in terms of what our work is moving forward.
Continue to revisit it.
And ultimately,
this would be our
back to
our main suggestion. Take a deep breath. Go to church.
So you're right. Just by attending the services, so much of what we're what we desire for those we love most will come forth. So we thank all of you very much today.
We do have time if someone has another question. You guys have done
Yes,
such a great job
absolutely.
having questions throughout.
Please.
Questions, please.
Or things that you're thinking about
Right.
or anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't
Yes.
want to monopolize, and I'm sorry that but one of the things I wanted to point out is once we have the safety net of the church, even if the kids see the parents getting frustrated with whatever is going on at home, knowing that the parents, the frustration is normal part of life, instead of if you are this great Christian and this good person, you never get frustrated, you never get upset.
Oh, yeah.
For the children to see that and to feel that that is not the end of the world.
Right.
And we will go and we will fix the problem and we will go to Father and we'll talk about it as a family, as an individual, whatever. It gives that kind of, okay, I can still be frustrated, but that is not the end of the world for me.
That's modeling resiliency
Yeah.
right there.
Exactly.
Right. And I think that's absolutely what we're talking about when we say we are fallible. I mean, we up here will be the first to admit, we've made mistakes. We are not perfect parents. But in that process, there's a dialogue with, our friends, our family, our children. There's asking for forgiveness. This is a process. And so the kids can see that modeling as well, that, mom makes mistakes, but it's okay. We still love each other. We still move forward. Everything's, all right.
Reminds me of the beauty of Forgiveness Sunday.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes.
One final comment?
I was going to ask a question.
One question.
Project, I know some of what you might say, but what are some tips on how you respond and reconcile a balance towards having those high expectations, modeling, allowing the church infrastructure for the children? I have 3 kids of my own, and I find that a lot of times they tend to blame the faith or the church for feeling so different because I'm not on the team because of church, or because I can't go to the birthday party because it's on a Sunday morning, or why do I always have to go to these additional services? And so, of course, there's a dialogue there, but sometimes as young children, preteens and so forth, they see it as something that's ostracizing them. And, we talk about being different and called to be aliens in this world and being light, but that can become a difficult thing to balance. And so you want to be careful not to turn their frustration toward God and these wonderful, deep-rooted mysteries within the church. But, this morning, for example, for me to be here, my son needed to accompany my mother to a funeral service. And so I actually even said to him, you don't have to attend the whole thing, you can sit and read a book. And so that's part of the human, negotiating that we have to do as parents. And so I don't know if you have any thoughts on that as well. I want him to be resilient. I also want sometimes the gift of failure for him to face, like, I'm going to feel, like I failed in my ability to be on a team or be part of this friendship, and that's okay, I can bounce back. But developmentally, I don't know how to navigate that in terms of an appropriate time scale sometimes.
I think it's a struggle, and I think at each age it's different. It will grow with your dialogue with your kids, but I think that
And for each child.
and for each child, and I think there's the difficulty, but I think also bringing in the wonderful things that it has and highlighting those. The services often lead to special, I don't know if you have coffee hour or thing. We have it's a difference between if people celebrate Halloween or not, but in our parish it's not something that we do, and it's very hard for my daughter now coming into school and the dressing up and everything, and we've kind of developed where we go off with another family, we do a nature walk, we have a picnic, we make it a special time for them so that it's something totally different, but it's their own. And I think, of course, you make things about the funeral service or whatever, you make it so it's possible, because as with our God, it's not a heavy-handed, punitive way of looking at life. We want to expand and give them the beauty of what you're offering. So there are things that we are not able to do or that we don't do. I think part of that too is discussing in your family the values of the family, why you do these things, the strengths you're giving them, the benefits they have that they might not have if they didn't have this, the communion of your own family, and how that benefits them and the beauty that comes out of that.
Final word?
Okay.
Is that our bell?
Sorry, I jumped into that.
Yeah.
That's the bell. Thank you very
you.
much.
Thank
Please,
you.
please.
Thank you for coming.
And please feel free to continue the conversation.